I was thrown by your first question because I was like, I was just sort of thinking, like, that's all anybody's texting or talking about right now is Dan Campbell.
We're going to get to it. I think it's important to give the flowers to the team.
I agree with you.
So to get to what we really want to talk about here, and Breach just talked about the first half. Lions had 280 total yards in the first half to 131 that Breach mentioned. They had 148 rush yards, and it looked like Kyle Shanahan was going to walk down the sideline and strangle Steve Wilkes for not getting the defense to play like it's supposed to. But let's get to what happened with Dan Wilkes and his aggressiveness here, because here's what I'm going to say. That's what got them here, this aggressiveness. So yes. I'm not going to fault Dan Campbell for that, but you can certainly be angry if you're a Lions fan or if you're Pete Prisco, who's a traditionalist, or even BMAC was tweeting about it. So here we go. 24-10. Campbell goes for it on 4th and 2 at the 49ers 28-yard line, and Josh Reynolds drops the ball that hits him in the hands. Is it a tough catch? Yes. Should he catch it? Yes, he should also.
I think you got to back it up to right before half when it was 4th and goal on the 3-yard line, and he told he told Tom Rinaldi, one of the two, that he agonized over the decision to kick the field goal. I would have kicked because it's the end of the half, but it's also like the karmic nature of not going for it there, and then like you don't get any of the breaks in the second half stood out to me for sure.
But to Brinson's point there, that just proves that there is at least one conservative bone in Dan Campbell's body, and he used it right before halftime. So,
and it sounded like Greg Olsen
made
the point
would you have kicked
that
or gone there? Would you have kicked or gone there?
It sounded like Greg Olsen made the point that because you saw Dan Campbell go talk to the official and was looking down the hash mark, and if it had been 2.5 yards instead of 3.5, maybe that changes his math. So I think that was the dividing line, the 3-yard line in that instance. I'm fine with him kicking it there because you go up. What are you up at halftime?
You're up 20. No, you're up 24-7 at half with that kick. And he did say it was a smidge. This is a quote. It's a smidge too far for us. And to your point, Wilson, I think he walked down the sideline, saw where it was. It's the 3. And look, like the analytics are taking the numbers that are being run through the stats and information system that's being distributed. Like, for instance, ESPN's analytical operation is taking the number that they get from the NFL game stats and information system, right? And it's saying, okay, what would you do on 4th and 3? Well, if you're Dan Campbell and you walk down there, it's 4th and 3 3/4. Like that's, that could be 4th and 3 in the game book, but it's probably closer to 4th and 4. And so I think that stuff kind of eludes us in the moment as well.
Yeah. All right. So let's get back. So we got the field goal. I think I'm okay with that. I'm guessing you guys are okay with the field goal before half.
The one thing I'll say about the field goal real quick is that the thing is, if you go for a touchdown, you don't getting up 3 scores is the key there. And if you get the touchdown, you're still only up 3 scores versus the field goal. You're up 3 scores, and a field goal is basically 100% from that close. A touchdown obviously is not. And if you don't get it, you're only up 2 scores. The 49ers get the ball first in the first half. And at that situation, all I thought about was the Bengals Chiefs AFC title game where the one the Bengals won, where the Chiefs went for it, didn't get it, and they could have made it a 3 score. It's just, there's a lot of dynamics.
But to that point, when they kick the field goal before the half, right? Like if they go for it and don't get it, it's the same argument where when they went for it on 4th down and then the Niners go down and score a touchdown, even though it was like basically a completely fluke play off of a face mask that Brandon Ayuk ended up catching, it's like, well, that's what Dan Campbell gets for not going for it. However, I liked going for it in the instance you're talking about, Wilson.
Okay, so let's go through the painful reliving of what happened in the second half for these Lions. So Dan Campbell goes for it on 4th and 2. They're up 24-10 on the 49ers 28-yard line. 7 minutes to go in the third quarter. I mentioned Josh Reynolds dropped the ball that hits him in the hands. Tough catch. Yes, should he have made it? Absolutely. Yes. So instead of going up 27-10, the aforementioned Brandon Ayuk, Kendall Vildor helmet smash touchdown or to the 5-yard line happens. And look, man, we say it all the time. There's a reason these guys are playing defense because they can't catch. The ball hit him right in the freaking face. You would like to make that catch. He didn't make the catch. Shout out to Brandon Ayuk. And look, the other thing we talk about a lot about is that sometimes Brock Purdy struggles with the deep ball in terms of underthrowing it. He actually overthrew that one. So I'll give him credit for unleashing that one.
I thought there could have been OPI there, honestly. Like you kind of hit Wilbur there. Breach, in that instance, 48-yard field goal. You mentioned going up 3 scores, and I agree with you. Going up 3 scores is a huge difference. Would you have kicked or gone for it there?
Now, here's real quick to answer your question, Brenton. Number one, did Michael Badgley have the worst week of practice in the history at the NFL? Because this is just Dan Campbell's not even looking at his kicker. He didn't hesitate for the 2 in the second half. Obviously, he did in the first half. And so both of those kicks, and we'll get to the second one. So I'll just stick to this one right now. This one would have been a 46-yard field goal. I tweeted out that it could have factored into Dan Campbell's decisions that Michael Badgley has a career percentage of 59.1% between 45 and 49 yards. So this is not a lock by any means. Now, that being said, this came with 7 minutes left in the third quarter. If I have a chance to go up 3 scores with 7 minutes left in the third quarter, I am absolutely going to try it. So I would have kicked.
But Breach, let me push back on that. So 50, what's the percentage?
Yeah, say that again. I was texting it to my friends, so we were all arguing about this.
59.1 between 45 and 49.
Okay, do you feel better about converting a 4th and 2 or 59% chance of making the field goal?
Well, now hold on. This because I didn't see Michael Badgley warm up on Sunday. There's a lot that factors into it.
All right, Michael Jackson, keep me walking.
Badgley was ripping Jaeger shots on the sideline.
It was perfect kicking weather. I mean, it wasn't cold. It wasn't rainy. It was absolutely perfect kicking weather. So if he was out there drilling 50-yarders and warm-ups, then I'm absolutely going to have confidence in him to make that. And look, going up 3 scores again against a team that had mostly struggled. Obviously, they only got a field goal on their first drive of the half. So it's not even like they got that touchdown. They didn't have that momentum yet. They got 3 points. You take that 3 points right back from them, and they're back at square one where they were at halftime, except they've lost 8 minutes. So I would have taken the field goal there.
Okay. All right. Let me get through these and then we'll reevaluate. No interruptions for 90 seconds. Here we go. So instead of going up 27-10, the Ayuk play down to the 5-yard line. CMC scores a few moments later. And then it's 24-17. A little tight butt syndrome going on. So 5 minutes left to go in the third quarter. 2 minutes later, it's tied. Jahmyr Gibbs fumbles on the first play on a wonky handoff. And a 70-point lead in 8 minutes. Arrivederci. So
17.
That was like
70.
That was a turnaround. And I'll just ask you, Brinson, how much blame are you putting on Dan Campbell? Because as Breach notes, if you kick the field goal there, you're up 3 scores, and that makes things immeasurably more difficult, you would imagine, for the 49ers.
I think that, look, Dan Campbell coaches. Here's where I stand on this. And for me, it's as simple as Dan Campbell was hyper aggressive all year long, and we loved it. And when it worked great. You were rolling the dice on these 4th down conversions. And we've gone back and forth on a text thread with me and my friends about this. It is like a huge arguing point that there's no right answer for it. Even the analytics, like Seth Walder tweets out ESPN's in-house analytics for it. And it's like, it's right on the edge. We're talking like somewhere between 0.1 and 0.5, percent added win probability. It's not a ton, it's fractional. And I think that Dan Campbell has had, I've said it before in every preview, that his aggressiveness could flip these games because as an underdog, it gives you a chance to change, to change how your aggression can change everything and give you an opportunity for more possessions. For instance, when they're up 24-10, and he goes for it on 4th and 2, and if Josh Reynolds catches that, you burn 2 or 3 more minutes off of the clock and potentially get a touchdown and maybe put the game away. So I'm okay being aggressive there. I thought at the end of I thought that the third one where they were down.
Well, that one yet. Because
so I would have gone for it on the second one. I'm fine with kicking before half. I would have gone for it on the second one. I would have kicked on the third one, and then I wouldn't have used my timeout at the end of the game. That's where I sort of stood on his. But to answer your question, Wilson, I don't blame Dan Campbell for being the same coach, the same guy that he was throughout the year, and just catching some bad breaks and losing because of it.
Hey, Breach, let me add real quick the next one you're talking about here. 4th and 3 from the 49ers 30-yard line, just under 8 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. Goff rolls right and throws incomplete when he gets flushed out of the pocket there. The 49ers come down. Elijah Mitchell, one play, one touchdown, 34-24, game basically over. So same question to you there, Johnny, unless you have something else you want to add.
Well, look, I understand that this is the point Wilson made all year whenever I would push back on Dan Campbell, that you have to know when to not be crazy. Well, no, Wilson, because it blew up in his face here.
Oh.
But you were saying, and you said this about the Cowboys game, the 2-point conversion after the 5-yard penalty that pushed him back to the 7. That's just Dan Campbell's nature, and maybe he'll come back and bite him in the butt. Maybe it won't, but that is his philosophy. That's how he does things. But we did see that is not how he always does things, because he did kick the field goal in the first half, as we mentioned, which is why it's key to bring that up, as Brinson mentioned. And so, and it wasn't even the fact that they failed on these 4th downs. It's that you have a running game that was averaging 7 yards per carry, and you threw the ball on both 4th downs. Maybe, I don't know.
Well, they ran it on the 3rd down at the end of the game, Breach.
The 3rd down run at the end of the game was a horrendous play call.
Breach called that one in. That was his fault. He told Ben Johnson to run that play.
But here, real quick on Dan Campbell, though, here's what I'm going to say about Dan Campbell is that you have to know when to rein it in. You see your team flailing, especially on the second one, when it's 27-24, the 49ers have all the momentum. The last thing you want to do is, I mean, as soon as they failed there, did anybody think that the Lions defense was going to get a stop? No, you knew the 49ers were going to score and it was game over. You kick a field goal, it's 27-27. Now the 49ers are on their heels. They're in a tie game with a 7-point underdog, and in a perfect situation for them to choke a game away. And instead, the Lions just choke this away.
3rd down comparisons. 17 points to 0 points, 170 yards to 42 yards, 126 passing yards for the Brock Purdy's, 22 for the Jerry Goffs. And the turnover. One other thing I want to mention, because we can talk about the decision-making with Dan Campbell, and I think Brinson's right, and Breach, I think you would like to agree, but that's why the Lions are where they are. They would have been an 8-win team, best case maybe, if they don't take those chances. But also want to know, like, little things also add up besides the decision-making from the head coach. Josh Reynolds forgot how to catch for large parts of this game. The Vildor doink doesn't help on the Brandon Ayuk thing. Breach, I want to ask you about this. What about, so they get backed up. They're on their minus 26 after a string of bad plays in the third quarter, I believe. Could have been the fourth quarter. The punter booms a 76-yarder. It bounces straight up inside the 4-yard line. And Chase Lucas, for reasons that remain unanswered to me, catches the ball in the end zone instead of calming down and catching it at the 1-yard line. That could have flipped the field position. Instead, they get it at the 20. That's another thing that happened. And then Melvin Fonwu missed the sack on Purdy. That saved a big run that got a first down. So those things also add up in terms
I'll just say on the punt real quick, just epitomized the Lions' night, where if you can't even down a punt correctly, and real quick, Debo brought the graphic up here that we didn't mention real quick because somebody's accusing me of classic hindsight takes, where that graphic said Dan Campbell's eventually going to cost his team more than Sam Laporta with his gambling, and that's the conversation we had after Laporta got injured in the final week of the season. And then we said that if he keeps being this aggressive, it's going to come back and bite him. We had that conversation in week 18. And I said the same thing that I'm saying right now. So it's been a month of saying this, and it did happen. So, but the punt, you have to down that. If no one would have touched that, it sits at probably the 2 or 3 yard line. And you put the 49ers right there in a 24-24 game, and your pass rush gets to Purdy. Maybe you get a safety if you force a 3 and out. So it's just little things like that. They just all added up. It was painful to watch. I can't even imagine watching this game with a Lions fan.
Anything?
Brenton's crying. Oh, he's on mute.
Oh,
I thought he was crying.
I thought he lost his voice.
Oh, tears coming out.
Sorry. Did you even hear me yell, Wilson? You look the same in both of those.
I noticed that, but I didn't hear you.
We read your mouth.
I heard you giggle. Let me ask you this. Do you think that it's possible that the way we view, the things that happened in the second half for the Lions, the punt stuff, the Gibbs fumble, the Brandon Ayuk catch, to me, like, momentum is a thing. Don't get me wrong. I think it's crazy where it's like, oh, momentum's not. I mean, momentum has to be real. Like, I'm an NC State fan. I've seen it rip apart an entire stadium several hundred times in my life. But I don't think that those things happen to the Lions because Dan Campbell did or did not go for it on 4th down. Like, I don't think the mentality of the team changed. One of Prisco's arguments on our text thread was that you got this young team and suddenly they're questioning themselves. And I mean, like, this is a viable argument, like, and we don't know. Like, do you guys think that at any point the decision making by Dan Campbell caused the Detroit Lions to pucker up, lemon booty breach, if you will, and make mistakes? Or do you think it was simply the 49ers weren't going to be held down that freaking long, not with that defense in the way, and frankly, the 49ers offensive game plan in the first half was just bad, and that Dan Campbell wanted to keep his foot on the gas, and they just suffered a series of what Lemony Schnickets would call a series of unfortunate events.
Breach, let me just say a couple things and then you can respond. Number one, I think that Brinson's magic beans that were shipped to Tomlin, he shipped it to Kyle Shanahan the last 2 weeks. Number one. And number two, you sort of touched on it with the Cowboys-Lions game and back in the regular season in terms of how Dan Campbell's going to approach things. And the only last thing I'll say is that we saw a bunch of quotes during the game from Lions players who said they would rather play for no one else than Dan Campbell, and he's gotten the most out of them. I can't imagine that any of those guys were worried about anything. They were probably just ready to go to the next play. And a lot of times when you ask players, they would much rather be aggressive than be passive. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that for the most part, but not in the fourth quarter of the NFC Championship when you have a chance to tie the game. I think that if you tie the game, you're saying, all right, I have confidence in my defense to get our team the ball back so that we can win this game. And obviously you showed confidence in your offense by going for it, but they let you down. And I don't know, it's just interesting because look, I think that when you look at the 2021 or maybe 22 Chargers, when they had Brandon Staley and he was hyper aggressive all the time and it blew up in his face, especially in that Raiders game in week 18 with the winner going to the playoffs and they didn't make it. And all people wrote about at the end of that season was, man, Staley doesn't know what he's doing, blah, blah, blah. And then to Brinson's words, he puckered up after that. He was never the same coach because he always got in his own head. He didn't know what to do in key situations. He didn't know when it made sense to go for it on 4th down. It was a changed man out there. So we'll see. Be interesting to see what Dan Campbell looks like going forward. But
hey, let me ask you one more thing before we move on. Would you have kicked a field goal earlier on the last drive for the Lions? They ultimately scored a touchdown, but they had to use the timeout. They had to go for a 4th down. And they had less than a minute left by the time they tried the onside kick.
I think the way to answer that for me is that not necessarily that you should have kicked earlier, but that, or maybe you should have kicked earlier. You needed to have the 3 timeouts, even if you were going to try an onsides anyway, which I think is a pretty viable case to make, that they, regardless, they were going to kick an onsides, try to stop them. You have to get the points. You have to be kicking off with 3 timeouts in your pocket. I think I would have preferred, Breach, and correct me if I'm wrong on the math here, after 3rd down when you run the ball, which you shouldn't have done. You have to pass the ball on 3rd down there. And I get, like, and again, a lot of this stuff is, if it works, that's great. And they did this before, I think late in the regular season when they ran on a 3rd down or a 4th down. They did it with Craig Reynolds in there. Most people were thinking, oh, he's a pass down back, they're going to pass it here. They run it, draw up the middle, scores a touchdown. Well, David Montgomery was tackled short of the goal line. The clock is running. To me, run no huddle or sprint your kicking team out there and bang home a field goal, even if it's like a 15, 18-yard field goal, whatever it is. Get a field goal, run the offense out there and run no huddle, but run a play because you're going to get the play off with over 40 seconds left and have 3 timeouts remaining. Like, you have to have the 3 timeouts left, no matter what. To me, that was the biggest failure.
Yeah, that was totally shocking that they let that happen. I don't know if Campbell would have had to sign off on that play call in that situation because it's so crucial. If running the ball, you don't get the touchdown, the game's over. And it was. I mean, that's what happened. Onside kicks are almost impossible to recover now. Yep. And it is. I probably would have kicked the field goal a little bit earlier, maybe when, Dan Campbell clearly doesn't trust his kicker, he wants to get touchdowns all the time. He doesn't do field goals. But the more time you leave yourself on the clock, when I think they got down to, it looks like the 16-yard line with about 1:35 left. If you kick the field goal there,
you get a first down, you just kick the field goal and you're down 7 and you kick off deep with 3 timeouts left. Like, that's not a crazy decision there.
Right. And then the flip side, now once he decided not to do that and you get down to the 1-yard line and you keep burning time at that point, I do think you have to have the touchdown because you keep costing yourself more and more time. And if they would have gotten the touchdown there, they had 2nd down at the 1 yard line. They had 3rd down at the 1 yard line. If they score on either of those 2 plays and have all 3 timeouts, you could theoretically kick it deep, because if you onside kick it, you're probably not going to recover it, and you have to make a stop no matter what. You have to make them go 3 and out. And if you kick it deep, use all your 3 timeouts to go 3 and out, you need like 15 yards to get in field goal range, although we don't know what Michael Badgley's field goal range. So I felt like they botched the end of the game. This was just not.
They called the timeout with 1 minute remaining. I would much rather sprint the offense. And look, granted, if you call the timeout because you're like, we're completely flustered, we have to have a play call ready that will score the touchdown. But if you score that touchdown with 45 seconds left and have 3 timeouts, that's substantially better than 56 and 2 timeouts.
If you score with 30 seconds left and 3 timeouts, that's better than 2 timeouts with a minute left, because the 49ers can run 40 seconds off the clock thanks to that timeout not existing. So anything over 20 with 3 timeouts would be better than 1 minute left with 2 timeouts. And so it was just crazy that, man, that was just not. I thought Dan Campbell was a better in-game coach than Kyle Shanahan. This is stuff I would expect out of Kyle Shanahan, just based on their track record and what we've seen in the postseason before. But man, no, this was a clinic on what not to do in the final 2 minutes of a game.
And just real quickly, I think it's worth noting, like, Josh Reynolds had a good season, and he had a great game against the Rams early on, his old team, helping them win that playoff game. He had 75 yards in the first quarter, I think. He had 2 really bad drops in this game. The 4th down one is like a 7 out of 10 bad drop. The 3rd down one's a 10 out of 10 terrible drop. And I get maybe your confidence is shaking or whatever. You could also, Prisco lamented, just while we're on decision making real quickly, lamented the flea flicker and said that it was, quote, a drive killer. And he said it at the time before like the drive actually ended. I mean, I don't mind it. They've been gashing him with the run, but like, you call that play and you get Jameson Williams, like, with the ball coming down to his hands, he got hit from behind a little bit. I was fine with it. I think it's just a couple of those plays go the Lions' way, and they win this game. I don't know, not easily, but they win this game pretty handily.
Here's something that Brian McFadden said on the pregame HQ tonight when we were talking about the ending of the game we're going to talk about next, but also it applies to this Lions team. He said at his first Super Bowl 2005, which was Coach Cowher, incidentally was in Detroit. Coach Cowher that week, 2 weeks in preparation, told the coaches and the players, do not change anything that you've done to get to this point, because you start turtling up and then your butt cheeks get tight and things like that happen. And we just saw a tweet that Debo put on the screen from Campbell's press conference, and he says he understands the scrutiny that comes with the decisions he made. He stands by the 4th down decisions. He gets that's part of the gig. He doesn't regret coaching the way he did. And I think it's the way you got to think about it. And sometimes, another thing that Dick LeBeau used to say, sometimes the bear gets you, sometimes you get the bear. Today, the bear mauled them. Our buddy Ben Solak tweeted this out, which is also incredibly demoralizing. Expected points lost for Detroit, minus 5.5 points for the Gibbs fumble. Started the snowfall of terribleness. The Ayuk doinker, minus 3 points. Reynolds 4th down drop, minus 3 more points. The incomplete to St. Brown on 4th and 3, minus 2.5 points. So, I mean, they could have won by 3 scores, it feels like, but they did not.